At my wedding, my drunk brother grabbed the microphone. He doesn't deserve this life or this woman. Security escorted him out. I continued the celebration, but when he lost everything 2 years later and came begging for help, the check I wrote had just one condition that made him break down in tears. I never thought I'd be writing this out, but I need to get this off my chest. Let me be clear from the start. What happened at my wedding wasn't just embarrassing. It was the final betrayal in a lifetime of them. 7 years ago, I married Violet, the most incredible woman I've ever known. We spent a year planning our perfect day, sparing no expense. I'd built my business from nothing, working 80-hour weeks for years, while my older brother Hugo coasted through life on charm and promises. Make no mistake, I earned every dollar I spent on that wedding. Every single one. Growing up, Hugo was always the golden child, athletic, popular, the one my parents bragged about. I was the quiet one, the planner, the one who actually followed through. By the time we reached our 20s, the pattern was clear. Hugo would have a brilliant idea, start something with enthusiasm, then abandon it when it required actual work. Meanwhile, I built my business methodically, brick by brick. The thing about Hugo, he couldn't stand that I succeeded where he failed. When I bought my first property at 25, Hugo told everyone I just got lucky. When I expanded my business regionally, he spread rumors that I had taken shortcuts. When I proposed to Violet, he cornered her at a family dinner to warn her about my temper, something I've never had. I kept track of every slight, every backhanded compliment, every time he tried to undermine me. Let me list them for context. $5,000 loan, never repaid from when he was between job A. 3 business connections I shared that he burned through carelessness. His emergency, when he needed a place to stay for just 2 weeks, that turned into 4 months. The time he hit on one of Violet's bridesmaids despite being married to Fiona. The advice he gave my clients behind my back, costing me a major contract. Despite all this, I invited him to my wedding. Violet suggested we take the high road. My parents insisted family should be there on our special day. I reluctantly agreed, though I assigned one of the security team to keep an eye on him. The ceremony went flawlessly. Violet looked absolutely breathtaking walking down the aisle, and I'll never forget the moment we were pronounced husband and wife. The reception started perfectly, too. The venue looked incredible. The band was on point, and everyone seemed to be having a great time. I should have known Hugo wouldn't let me have this one perfect day. I noticed him getting progressively drunker during cocktail hour. Fiona tried to slow him down, but he kept shrugging her off, getting louder with each drink. My best man, Neil, kept looking at me with concern, but I was determined not to let Hugo ruin this day. Make no mistake, I saw the storm brewing. I just underestimated how severe it would be. The toasts began after dinner. Neil gave a heartfelt speech. Violet's sister Lisa delivered a beautiful tribute that had everyone tearing up. Then my father stood to give his toast. That's when it happened. Hugo suddenly lunged forward, grabbing the microphone from my father's hand. Security moved immediately, but not fast enough. The room went silent as Hugo, swaying slightly, began what I can only describe as character assassination. He started by congratulating us with a sneer, then quickly devolved into accusations. He claimed I had stolen business ideas from him, that I had manipulated my way to success, that I had taken opportunities that should have been his. The worst part? He looked directly at Violet and told everyone that she had no idea who she had really married, that I didn't deserve someone like her, that I had everyone fooled. 7 years later, I can still feel the heat of rage and humiliation that washed over me in that moment. The absolute silence in the room, Violet's hand tightening around mine, my mother's gasp. Security reached him within seconds, but the damage was done. They physically removed him as he continued shouting accusations. Fiona followed them out, her face a mask of mortification. The room remained silent until my father, always the diplomat, awkwardly reclaimed the microphone and attempted to salvage the moment with a joke about siblings that fell painfully flat. The rest of the reception continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Some guests tried to pretend nothing had happened. Others whispered in corners. A few relatives actually approached me to ask if there was any truth to Hugo's accusations, as if my own wedding was suddenly an appropriate venue for investigating family grievances. What infuriated me most wasn't just the public humiliation. It was the realization that some family members actually believed him. Aunt Gianna pulled Violet aside later, concern etched on her face. My cousin Ruben avoided eye contact all night. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and no amount of celebration could fully extract them. Violet was incredible throughout, maintaining her composure, reassuring guests, even managing to get everyone dancing again. But I knew she was shaken. Later that night, when we finally had a moment alone, she asked me if I was okay. I lied and said I was fine, that Hugo's outburst meant nothing, that we shouldn't let him ruin our special day. But inside I was making a list of every person who had looked at me differently after Hugo's speech, a list of every slight and betrayal Hugo had ever committed against me, a list that would become my roadmap for what would follow. That night, while Violet slept beside me, I lay awake, calculating. This wasn't just about a ruined wedding speech. This was about years of undermining, years of jealousy, years of Hugo taking and taking while I worked and built. This was about him trying to poison the single most important relationship in my life. Some might think I should have let it go. That family is family. That holding grudges only hurts yourself. Let me be crystal clear. Those people have never had their character assassinated at their own wedding by someone who should have been in their corner. I sent a single text to Hugo the next morning before Violet and I left for our honeymoon. Don't contact me again. Then I blocked his number and social media. I maintained minimal contact with family members who had sided with him. I focused on my marriage, my business, my future. But make no mistake, forgiveness was never on the table. I simply bided my time. For 2 years, I watched from a distance as Hugo's life continued its predictable pattern of self-destruction. I heard through family channels about his drinking problems worsening, about tensions in his marriage to Fiona, about his financial struggles. I didn't cause any of it. I didn't have to. Hugo was perfectly capable of ruining his own life without my assistance. But when the inevitable collapse came, and it did come, I would be ready. Our paths wouldn't cross again until exactly 25 months after my wedding day, when Hugo's life had completely fallen apart, and he reached out to me as his last resort. By then, I had prepared everything. The check I would write had exactly one condition attached, a condition that would cost him the only thing he had left, his pride. Sometimes revenge isn't about causing pain. It's about waiting for the perfect moment to extract your price, and his payment was coming due. Update: let me be clear. I never intended to spend the first years of my marriage focused on my brother's downfall. But some debts must be paid in full, and Hugo had run up quite a tab. After my wedding, Violet and I returned from our honeymoon in Bali with renewed energy. We threw ourselves into building our life together, renovating our home, expanding my business, and even discussing starting a family. From the outside, it probably looked like I'd moved on from Hugo's wedding spectacle. Nothing could be further from the truth. While I maintained my no-contact rule with Hugo, information had a way of finding me. My mother still believed brothers should reconcile, so she'd casually mention his latest misfortunes during our monthly dinners. Cousin Ruben, who'd finally seen Hugo's true colors, would text me updates after family gatherings I no longer attended. Even Aunt Gianna, who'd questioned my character at the wedding, eventually apologized and became another unwitting intelligence source. 6 months after the wedding, the first significant domino fell. Hugo lost his job. According to my mother, he'd been showing up late, taking extended lunches, and underperforming for months. The drinking that had been evident at my wedding had apparently become a daily habit. When she told me this over dinner, I nodded sympathetically while finishing my steak. Violet squeezed my hand under the table, knowing exactly what I was thinking. That night, I started a document on my computer. Hugo's Consequences, I named it. Just a simple list at first. Dates, events, outcomes. A living record of karma in action. But soon it became something more strategic. I hired a private investigator, Not to follow Hugo, that would be too obvious and unnecessary. Instead, I needed documentation of debts, legal issues, and financial misdeeds. Everything that already existed, but remained scattered and unconnected. After all, you can't effectively use leverage you don't fully understand. The investigator's report arrived 3 weeks later, and it was more detailed than I'd anticipated. Hugo had taken out multiple high-interest loans. He'd borrowed money from his in-laws. He had gambling debts to people you don't want to owe money to. Most interestingly, he'd been cutting corners on his taxes for years. Nothing major, but enough to cause significant problems if authorities took a closer look. Make no mistake, I never falsified evidence or created problems that didn't exist. I simply made sure existing issues found their way to the right people. An anonymous tip to tax authorities about inconsistencies in Hugo's returns. A casual conversation with a friend who worked at the bank holding Hugo's mortgage. Mentioning Hugo's gambling to Fiona's brother at a community event. Small nudges to an already unstable house of cards. 9 months after my wedding, Hugo and Fiona had their first major public fight. It happened at a restaurant where my business partner was coincidentally having dinner. According to his account, Fiona discovered credit card statements showing Hugo had been gambling again after promising to stop. She'd thrown water in his face and left him sitting alone. My business partner texted me this information in real time, not knowing I'd been tracking Hugo's downward spiral for months. I added it to the document. Around the 1-year mark after my wedding, Hugo attempted to restart his career. He approached several companies in our industry, leveraging connections he'd made through me years earlier. What he didn't know was that I'd already had conversations with key people at each of these businesses. Not to explicitly warn them against Hugo, that would be too obvious. Instead, I shared concerns about his current situation and reliability issues, just enough to ensure no doors would open. When my mother mentioned Hugo's frustration at being unable to find work, I expressed appropriate sympathy while ordering dessert. The real turning point came 14 months after the wedding. Hugo and Fiona's house went into pre-foreclosure. This presented an opportunity I couldn't ignore. Through a shell company managed by my attorney, I purchased the debt from the bank. Not to foreclose immediately, that would be too merciful. Instead, I adjusted the terms just enough to create a slow, painful financial strangulation. By the 18-month mark, Hugo had moved from occasional gambling to regular visits to the casino. My investigator documented these trips, along with evidence of something I hadn't anticipated. Hugo had started seeing someone on the side, a bartender at his favorite casino who apparently offered sympathy along with drinks. The photos landed in my inbox on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, they'd been anonymously delivered to Fiona's workplace. I won't pretend I didn't feel satisfaction when my mother called that weekend, distressed because Fiona had thrown Hugo out of the house they were already losing. The details were exactly what you'd expect. Accusations, denials, neighbors watching the spectacle unfold on their normally quiet street. Hugo had apparently been sleeping in his car, which was repossessed 3 days later. 20 months after my wedding, Hugo hit rock bottom. He lost his temporary job at a convenience store after showing up intoxicated. Fiona filed for divorce. His gambling debts had grown to the point where even his unsavory creditors had written him off as a lost cause. He'd burned through friends' couches and goodwill until no one would answer his calls. No one except our parents. They took him in, converting their home office into a bedroom for their 41-year-old failure of a son. My father, always practical, established ground rule: no drinking, actively look for work, contribute to household expenses when possible. Hugo agreed to everything, desperate for a roof over his head. The irony wasn't lost on me. The golden child had fallen so far that he needed the safety net of his retirement-age parents. Meanwhile, Violet and I had welcomed our first child, a daughter we named Sophia. My business had expanded to 3 states. We'd purchased a vacation property in the mountains. Everything Hugo had claimed I didn't deserve at my wedding had multiplied while his life imploded. I maintained my distance through all of this, watching through my network of family informants as Hugo attempted sobriety. Failed. Tried again. As he went to interviews, but couldn't explain the gaps in his employment history. As he slowly, painfully recognized that actions have consequences. Then came the foreclosure auction for Hugo and Fiona's house, the home they'd bought when times were good, when Hugo still maintained the illusion of success. The shell company I controlled exercised its right to take possession. I had no interest in the property itself. I simply couldn't allow Hugo the dignity of a clean financial break. 23 months after my wedding, during Sunday dinner at my parents' house, my mother mentioned that Hugo had been asking about me. Apparently, he'd been sober for 2 months and wanted to apologize. I changed the subject, but the seed had been planted. Hugo was finally ready to acknowledge his wrongdoing. But an apology wasn't nearly enough. The final piece fell into place exactly 2 years and 1 month after my wedding day. I received a text from an unknown number. Hugo had gotten a new phone after not being able to pay his bill. The message was simple. Raphael, I know I have no right to ask, but I need help. I've hit bottom. Can we talk? For a moment I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction or triumph, but a hollow sensation. I'd spent 2 years methodically documenting and occasionally accelerating Hugo's self-destruction. Now he was exactly where I wanted him. Desperate, humiliated, with nowhere to turn except the brother he'd publicly tried to destroy. I waited 3 days before responding. 3 days during which Hugo undoubtedly checked his phone countless times, hope diminishing with each silent hour. When I finally replied, my message was equally simple. Friday, 8 p.m., Vincenzo's. Vincenzo's wasn't chosen randomly. It was Hugo's favorite restaurant during his successful days. A place where he'd taken clients and dates to impress them. A place where the staff had once known him by name but would now see him as just another customer, if they remembered him at all. Most importantly, I now owned it, having purchased it 6 months earlier when the original owner retired. Friday arrived, and I made sure to be seated first, at the best table in the house. I wore my finest suit, ordered an expensive bottle of wine, and waited. The staff had been instructed to treat me with the deference due to their employer, but to give no indication of this to Hugo. He arrived 17 minutes late, looking nothing like the confident brother who had grabbed the microphone at my wedding. His clothes were clean but worn. His once athletic frame had thinned, and his eyes darted nervously around the restaurant. The maitre d' led him to my table with barely concealed disdain. The contrast between us couldn't have been more stark. My tailored suit against his department store clearance, my confident posture against his hunched shoulders, my future against his past. For 2 hours I listened as Hugo detailed his downfall. The foreclosure, the divorce, the gambling debts, the failed attempts at employment. He took responsibility in ways I hadn't expected. Admitting his jealousy and resentment toward me had poisoned every aspect of his life. He apologized for the wedding incident, calling it the biggest mistake of his life. He explained that he'd been in therapy through a community program, working on his issues with alcohol and envy. I said very little, watching him squirm under my gaze. The waiter refilled my wineglass repeatedly while Hugo nursed a water. I ordered the most expensive steak on the menu, while Hugo hesitantly selected the cheapest pasta dish. The power dynamic was unmistakable to everyone in the restaurant. Finally, Hugo got to the point. He needed money, not just for himself, but to repay our parents, who had depleted their savings helping him. He needed a job reference. He needed a second chance. That's when I reached into my jacket and removed a check. The amount was substantial, enough to clear his debts, provide first and last month's rent on an apartment, and give him breathing room to rebuild. His eyes widened when he saw the figure, a glimmer of hope breaking through his desperation. But before I slid the check across the table, I placed another document on top of it, a single sheet of paper with a paragraph of text and a line for his signature. "There's one condition," I told him, watching his expression shift from hope to wariness. "Just one." As Hugo read the condition, the color drained from his face. His hands began to shake, causing ripples in his water glass. This wasn't just about money. This was about something far more valuable: his dignity, his relationship, his final support system. When he looked up from the document, there were tears in his eyes. Not tears of gratitude, but of understanding. He finally recognized the full extent of what he had done 2 years ago and what it was going to cost him to make it right. The choice was simple: accept my condition and receive the financial lifeline he desperately needed, or walk away with his last shred of pride intact but his future in ruin. In that moment, as Hugo stared at the check that could save him and the condition that would break him, I felt neither joy nor pity, only the cold satisfaction of justice about to be served. His hand reached for the pen. Update 2. Something shifts in you when you watch someone who tried to destroy you finally break. It's not quite satisfaction, not quite peace. It's something colder, more primal. Let me tell you what happened when Hugo accepted my terms. His hand trembled as he signed the document at Vincenzo's. The condition wasn't complicated, but its implications were devastating. I'd required Hugo to attend a family reconciliation dinner at my home the following weekend. There, he would read a statement I had prepared, a complete accounting of every lie he'd told about me, every betrayal he'd committed, every scheme he'd attempted. This reading would be recorded, and I would keep the video permanently. Simple, right? Hugo certainly thought so as he scrawled his signature across the page. One embarrassing evening in exchange for financial salvation. As I slid the check across the table, I noticed his relief. He actually thought he was getting off easy. He had no idea what I'd really planned. The week between our restaurant meeting and the reconciliation dinner passed in a blur of precise preparation. I selected the guest list with surgical precision. Our parents, of course, but also Aunt Gianna, who had questioned my character after the wedding, Uncle Reuben, who had been Hugo's confidant for years, Fiona, Hugo's soon-to-be ex-wife, and a few key cousins who had taken Hugo's side in family disputes. 12 people total, each one significant in Hugo's remaining support network. Violet questioned my intentions only once, as I finalized the menu for the dinner. She gently suggested that perhaps I'd made my point already, that Hugo's public humiliation might be excessive. I reminded her of his microphone grab at our wedding, of the guests who still occasionally asked her about his accusations. She nodded slowly and returned to playing with Sophia, our daughter. She understood, even if she didn't entirely approve. I spent 3 evenings drafting Hugo's statement. This wasn't just about the wedding incident. This was a comprehensive confession, covering decades of lies, manipulations, and betrayal. I drew from the private investigators' reports, from family stories, from my own memories. Each paragraph was meticulously crafted to reveal Hugo at his worst, while sounding authentically self-reflective. By the time I finished, the document ran 7 pages. The day of the dinner arrived. I had our home professionally cleaned, hired a premium catering service, and set up high-quality recording equipment disguised as ordinary decor. Nothing could be left to chance. When the doorbell rang at precisely 7 p.m., I straightened my tie, kissed Violet on the cheek, and went to welcome my guest. Our parents arrived first, visibly uncomfortable but hopeful. Father had aged noticeably since taking Hugo in. New lines etched around his eyes, his shoulders slightly stooped. Mother hugged me too tightly, whispering thanks for giving Hugo another chance. Their gratitude made what would follow all the more satisfying. The others arrived in quick succession. Aunt Gianna brought an expensive bottle of wine. Uncle Reuben wore a suit that no longer fit properly. Cousins Neil and Lisa came together, both eyeing me warily. And then Fiona, thin, elegant Fiona, with her perfect posture and watchful eyes. She'd agreed to come despite the pending divorce, curious about what this reconciliation might entail. Hugo arrived last, exactly 12 minutes late. He wore the only decent outfit he still owned, the same one from our restaurant meeting. His eyes darted nervously around my foyer, taking in the obvious signs of prosperity he once claimed I didn't deserve. The marble flooring, the original artwork, the subtle scent of success. Cocktails came first. I played the gracious host, ensuring everyone's glass remained full, while I sipped sparingly from mine. Hugo drank water, one hand constantly fidgeting with his collar. As we moved to the dining room, I positioned him at the opposite end of the table from me, a symbolic distance that wasn't lost on anyone present. The first 2 courses passed with strained small talk, weather, local sports, safe topics that allowed everyone to pretend this was a normal family gathering. Hugo barely touched his food, pushing premium Wagyu around his plate like a child avoiding vegetables. By dessert, the tension had become palpable. Everyone knew something was coming, but only Hugo and I knew exactly what. After the plates were cleared, I stood and thanked everyone for coming. I spoke about family bonds, about forgiveness, about second chances. Then I explained that Hugo had something important to share, something that would help heal old wounds and clear misunderstandings. All eyes turned to Hugo. His face had gone pale, a thin sheen of sweat visible on his forehead. He looked down at the document I'd placed beside his water glass earlier. 7 pages of single-spaced text. His confession, his humiliation, his price. What happened next exceeded even my expectations. Hugo began reading in a shaky voice, starting with the wedding incident. He admitted to being drunk, to being consumed with jealousy over my success and happiness with Violet. He confessed that every accusation he'd made during his microphone grab had been a lie motivated by his own failures and resentment. Our mother gasped. Father stared at his hands. The room grew thick with discomfort as Hugo continued. He read about borrowing business ideas from me and claiming them as his own, about spreading rumors to my client, about the times he'd stolen from our parents while blaming household staff, about cheating on Fiona multiple times, not just with the casino bartender, but with her friend years earlier, about gambling away their savings while claiming the money went to investment. Fiona's composure cracked first. She gripped her water glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Then came the tears, silent streams that she didn't bother wiping away. Hugo avoided her gaze, his voice growing hoarse with each revelation. Page after page, year after year of deceptions exposed under the dining room's chandelier light. When he reached the part about manipulating our dying grandmother into changing her will to favor him, Aunt Gianna stood abruptly, her chair scraping against hardwood. For a moment, I thought she might leave. Instead, she moved behind Hugo, reading over his shoulder as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing without seeing it in writing. Uncle Reuben, who had defended Hugo for years, removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes repeatedly. Cousin Neil stared at the ceiling. Cousin Lisa texted furiously under the table, no doubt spreading this spectacular downfall to other family members in real time. Throughout it all, I maintained perfect composure. Occasionally, I'd nod encouragingly, as if supporting Hugo's brave honesty rather than orchestrating his complete destruction. The recording equipment captured everything, every crack in his voice, every reaction, every moment of a family recognizing the cancer that had grown among them. By the final page, Hugo could barely speak. The confession concluded with him acknowledging that he didn't deserve anyone's forgiveness or support, that he was solely responsible for his downfall, that Raphael, me, had succeeded through hard work and integrity, while he had failed through laziness and deceit. When he finished, silence engulfed the room. No one knew what to say. No one even knew where to look. I let the moment stretch painfully before speaking. I thanked Hugo for his honesty. I spoke about healing and moving forward. I even offered him a job, not in my company, but at one of my properties. Entry level, minimum wage, night shift. The position would require him to live in a specific apartment complex I owned, where I could monitor his activities. The rent would be reasonable, but would ensure he remained financially dependent on my goodwill for years to come. To everyone else, it sounded generous. A brother extending a lifeline, despite years of betrayal. Only Hugo understood the collar I was placing around his neck. Our parents thanked me profusely. Father actually cried, something I'd seen only twice before in my life. Mother hugged Hugo, but something had changed in how she looked at him. The golden child's luster had finally permanently dulled. Fiona left without speaking to anyone. Her divorce attorney would receive the video by morning. Aunt Gianna informed Hugo she would be changing her will. Uncle Reuben couldn't meet his eyes. Cousins Neil and Lisa made hasty excuses to leave. Within an hour, my home had emptied of everyone except family. Hugo sat alone at the table, the confession papers scattered before him, the check I'd written clutched in his hand. Our parents prepared to take him back to their home, where he would pack his belongings the next day before starting his new life under my thumb. As they were leaving, I took Hugo aside for a private word. I explained that the confession he'd just read, as devastating as it was, had actually been the edited version. I showed him briefly what I'd excluded: evidence of tax fraud I could still report, photos of him with other women I could still send to mutual acquaintances, documentation of debts I could still call due. His face crumpled as the full extent of my leverage became clear. This wasn't a one-time humiliation. This was permanent subjugation. The job, the apartment, the financial dependence, all of it designed to keep him under my control indefinitely. One misstep, one complaint about his treatment, one attempt to rebuild relationships with family members, and I would release everything else. He actually thanked me before leaving, thanked me for the opportunity, thanked me for my forgiveness, thanked me while signing away his future. 2 years after Hugo grabbed that microphone at my wedding, justice had been served, not through violence or illegal means, but through something far more effective: the systematic dismantling of a man's entire support system, the calculated destruction of his remaining dignity, and the establishment of a power dynamic he would never escape. The video of his confession sits in my private cloud storage. The original statement with his signature remains in my safe. The property where he works nights and the apartment where he lives alone are constant reminders of my reach. Occasionally I review the footage, not from any sadistic pleasure, but as one might check a security system, ensuring all remains as it should be. Some might call my revenge excessive. Those people weren't at my wedding. Those people don't understand that some betrayals can only be answered with complete dominance. Make no mistake, I sleep perfectly well at night. Hugo is the architect of his own destruction. I simply ensured he couldn't rebuild from the ruins. Violet occasionally suggests I've gone too far, that continuing to control Hugo's life borders on cruelty. She doesn't understand that mercy would be the true cruelty, allowing him the freedom to potentially harm our family again. Besides, Hugo seems almost grateful these days. When we pass each other during my monthly property inspections, he lowers his eyes appropriately. When I adjust his work schedule to include holidays and weekends, he accepts without complaint. When I reduce his hours just enough to create financial strain, but not enough to justify leaving, he finds ways to economize further. He's learning, finally, the lesson he should have understood years ago. Actions have consequences, words have power, and some debts can never be fully repaid. The family now treats me as the unquestioned patriarch, despite my younger age. Holiday gatherings happen at my home. Financial advice is sought from me first. Even our father defers to my judgment on family matters. As for Hugo, he wasn't invited to Sophia's first birthday party last month. He sent a small gift nonetheless, something inexpensive but thoughtful. I returned it unopened with a note explaining that his presence in my daughter's life would be determined solely by his continued compliance. Perhaps someday, years from now, I'll consider easing the restriction. Perhaps I'll allow him to rebuild some semblance of dignity. Perhaps, but not today, not tomorrow, not until the memory of that microphone grab fades completely from my mind. And honestly, I don't think it ever will.